instruction. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. Instruction. You must stay at home. Stay at home. Stay at home. The NHS will be unable to handle it. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide.
A brilliant start, eh? Good job you can cut this bit out, Al.
And that was the 15th of March, and I put petrol into my car on the way home, and the next time I put petrol in my car was 3.5 months later in the middle of June.
And then, bang, shut.
It all ground to a halt.
So the way we were dealing with patients literally changed overnight.
Yeah, lockdown 1 was a completely different way of working.
You go into teaching to be with children and to get the interaction with children, and all of a sudden that was just wiped away.
You just get settled into a way of doing things for a month and it would all be changed again.
When the pandemic hit, there was a lot of confusion about how to handle it.
November 2019. In Minchinhampton there are celebrations and free drinks. The Crown Inn has opened again after 7 long, dry years. At that very moment, on the other side of the world, in Wuhan, China, a virus is emerging that will dramatically affect almost every country in the world. For instance, it will go on to kill over 1 million people in America. It's called COVID-19. This film seeks to describe and archive how the virus and being locked down by it affected the social life and the economy of a small Cotswold town, Minchinhampton, and how the people here coped with it. So it seems appropriate to start with Minch life.
So with regards to Minch life, I would say it was pretty disappointing from the outset, actually, that this community group that was designed to host events, put on events, primarily to fundraise to put on the country fair, where 3,000 to 4,000 people arrive in Minchinhampton all on one day. That all came to a crashing halt. Festivals stopped. It became apparent very quickly that, in fact, although we were supposed to have a country fair, that just wasn't going to happen, which was going to be the first time for a long, long time that wasn't going to happen. Minch Life as an entity, obviously, I know a lot of people think of Minch Life as the Facebook page, but actually Minch Life has an offshoot that's the Facebook page. It's in its essence, it's a group of people, of volunteers, who give up a lot of time to put on community events and to make sure that the country fair actually happens. So that whole aspect, events, kind of came to a halt. And if you have a look at the Minch Life Facebook page, there's a whole section about the calendar. There's a lot goes on in Minchinhampton, a lot. There's all sorts of events going on all the time, whether it's yoga, toddlers groups, brownies, cubs. There's so much happens, and the Minch Life website brings all that together. You can find out any event. If you want to join a club, you can get on there and do that. It all ground to a halt. So it isn't just the country fair, actually. It's everything. It's every part of people's lives. The coffee mornings for the older generation, that all stopped. Everything stopped. Whole town just ground to a halt.
One thing that didn't grind to a halt, the village shop in the market square.
The week before the pandemic was declared by our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, we were very, very busy at the shop. And in fact, we only just about coped because the supplies were becoming scarce, especially flour and toilet rolls. On the Sunday, the 22nd of March, which was the day before the lockdown was declared, my daughter Lindsay had to stop people from coming in the shop because they were not doing the social distancing and etc., because obviously they were looking for the supplies. She didn't want to put the staff at risk, so she decided to put the table out. There was a few moans and groans, but the majority of people accepted that that had to be done. Now, as for guidelines at that stage, obviously the government had told us or advised us to social distance, wash our hands, and so on and so forth, that people know, right? But this just wasn't happening. The general public had to be served from the door, and they behaved themselves impeccably. We had the odd skirmish, but nothing dramatic. I had one upset with someone, but the general public in Minchinhampton were fantastic.
The consequence from us immediately was that we were not allowed to hold meetings, public meetings, face to face. That completely screwed up the way in which we delivered our business. Like every other authority and organisation, we had to go on to a very, very fast learning curve on how to use Zoom. And because one or two of the parish councillors are a little on the elderly side, shall we say, that wasn't necessarily the best way to run one's life. There were certainly at least a couple of councillors who were unable to sort out how to work Zoom. And indeed, we did have one notable meeting which was completely disrupted by a power cut. I believe that Minchinhampton as a community is very integrated anyway. I've always felt that ever since we came here in 1972. And everybody pulled together. Very, very early on, Liz Bruce and her support team became very concerned about people's access to food. They recognised that the food bank didn't deliver fresh fruit and vegetables. We put some money into that at the beginning to sort out that side of things. The tinned food was being done by the food bank. So we came to an arrangement with Brian Powell up in the shop, and Brian sorted out food parcels basically, which were delivered out by Liz and her team. It was just wonderful to see it happen, actually.
On the edge of our common lives Chloe Turner, a Green Party district councillor. You're a district councillor now, but you weren't a district councillor at the time of lockdown.
I wasn't a district councillor then, but I was working as a caseworker for Rachel Smith, who was the county councillor at the time. And so I got involved with quite a lot of the work that she was trying to do with local residents over the pandemic.
What sort of things do you have to do?
Well, we rang a lot of people, just sort of welfare calls, just seeing how people were doing, and that was a really interesting experience. Some people very quick, just sort of, no, we're fine, thanks for calling, yeah. And other people, they were very emotional calls. You know, quite often I was the only person who'd spoken to that person for a week, so sometimes it felt like, you know, it made a difference. I think it threw the council for quite a long time. You know, the technology that we're so familiar with now in terms of Zoom, Teams, that sort of thing, was brand new, and particularly at the county council, a lot of councillors are in their 60s, 70s. You know, this wasn't technology they were familiar with, and so for a while meetings just didn't happen, and when they did start to creep back, an awful lot of them was spent saying, you know, Malcolm, you're on mute. But I think, you know, once they got things together, officers worked really hard training up councillors, and you know, and so gradually things got back to normal again. There were green issues thrown up. I would say, I mean, at the time I was working as a project coordinator for a local single-use plastics campaign charity, and actually single-use plastics were one of the biggest issues, because on the one hand it was great that traders were able to continue and get food out to people in a safe way, but that way tended to be with disposable packaging, and so I would say that you know, that is an ongoing issue, is that a much greater greater prevalence of single-use materials, and we need to get back to that sort of reuse culture that we were starting to get into before. The traffic situation was amazing, particularly the first lockdown. I live right on the edge of the common, and it was extraordinary being able to just stroll down the road and sometimes not hear a car for minutes on end. It was lovely. Yes. There was definitely a community spirit that grew from that group, actually, and it's continued, and I'm sure projects will come out of that in the future from that network that grew up around the Minch Community Response Group.
So
yes,
that's a plus.
Yeah, definitely. So in 2020 I had 3 at primary school, so I was homeschooling 3 children of, I think at the time they were 6, 10 and 11, and I had 2 part-time jobs at the same time, both of which kept going throughout the pandemic. So, and my husband was still going into work every day, so it was a challenging time. I won't pretend that there weren't days when we slightly lost the plot, but it was also, I was probably lucky in that the school my children attend was not too strict about sticking to the timetable, and particularly in the first lockdown we were encouraged to just do what we could, and we very much went off timetable. We just did projects of what interested us at the time, and we spent an awful lot of time outside.
So do you think the children were damaged or benefited?
I think in that first lockdown, the children really flourished, actually. We were incredibly lucky with the weather, and we got very into foraging, spent an awful lot of time in the back lanes of Minch and making extraordinary things. And so it was very positive. I think in subsequent lockdowns, when there was a lot of screen time required by schools, that was when it was a lot tougher for children, yes. And I'm sure there'll be mental health fallout from that. I think my children seem to have borne it reasonably well. I think the school that they attend, the children seem to catch up remarkably quickly. So academically, at primary, I don't think it's had too much of an impact. From a mental health point of view, I think that's less obvious, and we may see that coming out over time.
Food and refreshment was obtainable not just from food banks or the market stores.
Once we got our head around what we had to do and realised we had to do something, that we needed to do something immediately, we decided let's just do cake and coffee to start with on that Saturday, the 24th of March. We thought, okay, so we put the cakes and we done the coffees, and all of a sudden by 2:15 that day, everything had sold out. Sunday we typed up a menu, Monday we delivered menus, and within 24 hours, the phone never stopped. From people wanting orders, from our little menu, unbelievable. And we decided to do home deliveries, which was brilliant to start off with, but really, just for the 2 of us, for Peter and I, it was far too much. We had to stop the home deliveries. But from the front of the door, with our little table and chairs, selling coffees, cakes, panini, sandwiches, little things Peter made from lasagnas to curry, it went fantastic for us. So really fantastic, and being well supported, immensely well supported from the village.
Before we look in some detail into how schools and children were affected by the lockdowns in March 2020 and the autumn of that year, how did more senior citizens manage?
I'm very involved with reeling, Scottish reels, and so certainly once a month, but maybe twice a month, I take a ghetto blaster and an amplifier and stand on a platform in a hall and call, and the average age, I would think, probably kind of 65 to 80, probably 40, 45 people at a time. And of course, it's, for that age group, it's very social, it's very physical, you've got to use your brain, you have a pattern of dancing to be remembered, and it can go wrong, and it can go spectacularly wrong, and it can be very funny, and it's fun. And certainly, I miss that hugely, as did my friends. And exactly the same with people in choirs. Again, it's physical. you've got to remember the words, but again, it is very social. And bridge players, they were kind of okay because they played bridge online. We have community coffee here. I missed it terribly. You know, just catching up on gossip.
There's the Monday morning
A
coffees.
Monday morning coffee.
Suddenly the whole thing's locked down. You don't go to school.
Yeah,
What's that like?
it's like when it started on the news, I think it was about New Year's, and it was like a new kind of disease was found in Asia.
Yeah.
And I didn't think much of it at first. And when it came all the way to the UK,
Yeah.
I started to think this is getting a bit more hardcore at this point.
Yeah.
But then I never thought that it would go to such a measure.
No.
So I never thought there'd be like a whole place where the whole world is locked down.
So what's it like when you're meant to be at school and you're not going to school? You're stuck at home.
Well, I mean, you get to stay in your pyjamas most of the time.
Oh right, okay. So you're staying. So that's an advantage.
Yeah.
Are there disadvantages?
Well, I mean, it's a different kind of learning environment at home than it is at school.
Because you're on screens. You have to be on screens all the time.
I mean, you usually get taught from parents saying like, you get them just saying you need to get off your screen a bit more. But at this point, we didn't really have a choice. So.
And in a way, they want you to be on your screens
Yeah.
as long as you're not messing about, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're encouraging you to be on screens instead of trying to get you off them. Is that right?
I mean, it was difficult, to be honest. At school, I usually just play football with my friends at break.
Yeah.
But in lockdown, there was pretty much none of that because you couldn't see anyone, you couldn't see any friends, you couldn't go
You're stuck
anywhere.
at home with your mother.
but yeah.
So do you think your learning suffered? Do you think you learnt less from a screen than you would in a discussion in a class with a teacher?
I wouldn't say it suffered. I'd say it wasn't as effective for obvious reasons, but I wouldn't say it suffered. I still think everyone doing it still learned quite a lot.
There must be kids at school you've got your own computer at home?
Yeah.
Your own screen. There must be kids who have to share screens with siblings and
Yeah.
who would find it much more difficult than you did.
Yeah, I can imagine how much more difficult that would be for them.
Yeah.
Because considering I had my own iPad that I could use, my own computer.
Yeah.
It was a whole lot more easy for me than it would have been for other people in the world.
And so probably you suffered less than some of the kids in your classes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't find it that difficult compared to news around the world.
No.
The stuff that I hear on TV about other children.
What was it like for their teachers?
So what we had to do at the outset, because it all seemed to happen very quickly in March, was to firstly pack up. We had a day to get all the children organised with all their books and bags and resources. We had no idea how long this was going to go on for, so all the children went home with very heavy bags and off they went, and we then discovered what Zoom was, so we could actually start to catch up with children and speak to children. But initially we were really just setting work that they accessed online, and we then gradually started to learn how to make little films on YouTube and send out links so that there were these lessons for the children. But basically, as I say, you go into teaching to be with children, and it was just a very, very difficult situation for everybody. I think initially for the children, they were quite excited because it looked as though they were going home and they were going to perhaps get a bit more holiday than they were expecting. So at the outset, nobody seemed to be too worried. We had no idea how it was going to go on. Well, we didn't know how long it would last. But I think that as it went on, the children then really, really struggled. They were missing their friends. They were missing the interaction. To be honest, I think academically, certainly I teach year 5 and 6, the older ones, I don't think really suffered too much academically. They were doing all the work, we were getting all the feedback, but what they really struggled with was missing out on all the social things and then playing football with their friends, all these sorts of things. We had some very, very sad children, and they were struggling, I think. I think children are very happy to be back in school, so very happy for that aspect of it, but they have had really the rug pulled from under them. They are feeling quite anxious and nervous. What if that can happen again? Their little lives, which have been very structured and very secure, all of a sudden they've had this huge disruption to their daily routine. We have children who are really suffering with anxiety, so much so that they have to be having GP appointments and have referrals to actually help them cope with their anxieties. I think the teachers, again, have found it very difficult. They're glad to be back with their colleagues and interacting. But it's been a shock to everybody. And again, there's that fear, is this going to happen again? The pandemic hasn't gone away. I think they have been very, very stressed. I have one colleague who is close to retirement, but was considering retiring a little way off, but has decided that this is going to be the final year.
Teachers weren't the only people whose professional life was drastically changed and challenged. In the struggle against the deadly virus, the NHS was on the front line.
We've never had to work through a pandemic before.
No.
We've coped with lots of big flu epidemics, but not a pandemic. And so the way we were dealing with patients literally changed overnight.
And how did it change?
Well, one day we were seeing a normal surgery with 14 patients coming into the surgery, face-to-face consultations, and then overnight we had to go to total triage. That was imposed by the government.
What does total triage mean?
It means that everyone had to be spoken to on the telephone first, ideally deal with them on the phone. Within a few days we were able to set up doing video consultations so we could see them.
That Zoom stuff sort of thing?
A video call on their mobile phone,
okay.
Or on their computer
if
they've got an iPad, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And then obviously some people were still needing to have a face-to-face consultation, so we would arrange for them to come into the surgery at a designated time.
But that's twice the work.
Yes. So actually, although people, maybe not so many face-to-face consultations, our workload went up by about 20% last year compared to normal years, because we had so many telephone contacts. And then bringing them in afterwards, we would be in full PPE, apron, mask, gloves. We'd ask the patient to wear a mask and wash their hands and stay distanced in the waiting room. We had to try and stagger appointments so that there'd only be 1 or 2 people at any one time, so there was a good distance between them. Keeping the doors open, so there was good ventilation through the building. All the way through, we were doing our best to keep the services running as near to normal as possible. So seeing people if they needed to be seen, giving advice on the telephone. The whole team pulled together, and it was quite a challenge, but we did manage to keep services going throughout the whole pandemic, and of course have opened up much more at the end of each lockdown. We were able to try and increase face-to-face consultations again.
If you're asking someone over the phone what your symptoms or whatever, is it a different experience? Do they answer differently than if you've got them face to face?
You miss out on a lot of the unspoken conversation, the body language, the way that someone might hesitate. You're not sure if they've just got a bad connection or if they're actually really anxious and not sure what to say next. So a face-to-face consultation is always much, much better, I think, for both the doctor and the patient, and we do prefer those, but that was the only way to really keep things open.
Also, if you've got difficult information to give to somebody, or sensitive, intimate, whatever, sad or whatever, if you're in a mask and they're in a mask, it must be a different experience than if you're eye to eye, smiles and all the rest of it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Again, it's that sort of non-verbal communication. If I ever have to give sad news, then I'll very often sort of try and reach out and hold someone's hand.
Exactly.
We're not allowed to touch. And if you're wearing blue rubber gloves, it just is very odd, and so that interaction certainly was a challenge.
Did you have to deal with COVID cases in the town?
Because we were sending people down to the Red Hub, which was this joint centre between all 5 practices in our network.
Right.
Anyone who had any serious symptoms which might be COVID were advised to go down to the Red Hub, where they'd be assessed by one of our network doctors. So we all took turns to go and man that particular place.
So where was that?
It was down at Beeches Green.
Oh,
it was a tent, so it was a drive-through.
Okay.
You would arrive in your car, you'd drive in one end of this big marquee, be seen by a doctor there, and then drive out at the other end. So yes, we certainly have had cases in Minchinhampton.
Yes.
Well, we're very lucky. We've had fantastic support with volunteers from the community. We've had people from Minchinhampton Charitable Trust, the trustees all stepped up and volunteered. We've had teachers from Minchinhampton School who came in to help do the computer entry and the marshalling, and we've had lots of local retired doctors and nurses, as well as the staff from Minchinhampton Surgery. We've all taken our turn to go and do vaccinations.
Sort of plus there, that the community spirit, things did come together in Minch. Quite a lot of people helping older people, all the rest of it.
And lots of volunteers who were doing shopping for people who were shielded. So yes, it's actually, it was really not quite the sort of the wartime spirit, but I think everyone did pull together.
I think it was like the wartime spirit in a way.
And it was very heartening to know that actually people were prepared to volunteer and do their bit, and it did make it work, and we had extremely good take-up of the vaccine, which has got to be a benefit for everybody.
Exactly as the plagues shut the theatres in Elizabethan London, so COVID closed our principal place of entertainment, the iconic market house in the centre of the town.
The difficulty we had was overnight, the income from the market house, which it's totally reliable on, disappeared. It was hard for the people who had already booked and got bookings, because we were actually doing quite well. But unfortunately, it all disappeared. We were one of many. The school had to close down almost immediately, and that was, the school is the prime funder of the market house at the present time, at that time as well. They took 4 days a week. So that it was quite a sizable sum of money that they provided us with. Alan Bourne's film night stopped, which was always very popular and always well supported, and which enabled people to come into the market house to see what it was really like and all about. The market, it varied, because in the summer months the market is downstairs in the Undercroft, which, although that was obviously affected, they had to pay more rent upstairs than they do for the Undercroft. So once again we lost out on that. We've been in a fortunate position. We'd done a big survey of all the people in Minchinhampton and asked them for pennies, and they all provided a sufficient money for us to make the entrance hall more welcoming. So we, a complete renovation in that, and we put in new carpets, new lighting, which was important because it was always a black tunnel.
With communal secular life put on hold, what of the spiritual? How did our church and chapel manage through it all?
We're still learning. I think, like us all, it started being on Facebook and YouTube. Then went on to streaming the service, which we're still doing. But yeah, so we still have it. It seems more of a chore now that we're all back in meeting together again. But as you say, some people just never came back, and that's the only way that they're going to choose to be part of church from now on. So we have to keep it going. As you say, none of us are media experts, so that's the difficulty.
No.
I mean, what about you? You still got all that going, and
it was such a struggle to try and make it just simply work.
Yeah.
And you could even get it all right, and you practiced everything, and it would still go wrong. And it's quite a stress to think of hundreds of people at home. We're all sitting here waiting for it to come online, and it doesn't come online, or it comes online and you can't hear it, or all these fantastic problems. And we're desperately trying to keep with it, and I still have 20 or 30 computers log on each week to see our Sunday worship from home. And it worked really well for a few months, and then suddenly all the sound's not working, and I have no idea why. We've done nothing different, and it just drives me insane. So we are working towards something a bit more of a professional setup. It takes a lot of my headspace trying to work this stuff out and trying to make it work every Sunday. Whereas what I really need is a big red button to say go live, and it will all happen.
I shouldn't really say this out too loud, but I didn't find I got a lot of help from our sort of like the Baptist Union with putting advice out, but the advice seemed to come weeks after you, because we were always logging on to Church of England going, they seem to be putting it out on the day when we needed it, and ours seemed to lag a little, which it was really frustrating, thinking, what are we supposed to do? And
yeah, we were quite lucky to have some quite firm steering, I think, which partly because it's Church of England, and part of the idea is you have bishops to show you the way. And so we were really lucky that a lot of the decisions we didn't have to make locally, and they made that centrally. Quite often the advice or guidance would come out late on a Friday, and you think, I've got to now process this ready for Sunday. I have 36 hours to make this work. So Steve, baptisms, weddings and funerals, how did they all go for you? And I think there was a particularly notable wedding.
Yeah, there was, yeah. So, I mean, the changes from, I mean, especially for the couples, you really felt sorry for them.
Yeah.
So we had a couple reduce it down to 30 people, and as you get closer to the date, to be told, I mean, a few days before, that has now to drop to 15 people. That was very tricky. And then having that question, do ministers and vicars count in this number or not? Or what about other staff in the thing? So we eventually said, look, don't count us in. You can have 15 guests. But we had one wedding, the famous one. We had one wedding where we did the wedding, very careful about people coming in, registering, sanitising their hands, wearing a mask, sitting in separate seats. So we did the wedding. Obviously the bride and groom didn't have to wear a mask. And all went well. And after the wedding, went off to the reception. Now, me and Danny, the other minister, we went along to the reception just to say hello and do a quick toast and then disappear. But we did notice there that they went, well, the more drink that flowed, the more people were hugging and chatting closely. And anyway, the Monday came and we got the phone call to say that someone at the wedding, who was a nurse, had to do a test and discovered that she had COVID. And so suddenly we're all panicking, thinking, what does this mean for the rest of us? And then slowly, as it went, it started to go through the group. So I think 13 out of the 15 who attended the wedding caught COVID.
People were so frustrated, particularly in the early days, that you either couldn't have a public funeral or the numbers were just really restricted and would drive people mad. And it was quite difficult in the interim sort of middle period where we were then on a risk assessment as to how many we could have on a Sunday morning for our own worship. And so our risk assessment said we could have quite a few and we could socially distance quite a lot of people in our big open space, but funerals were still being restricted to 15 people. Just seemed quite crazy. Whereas at the same time, if a baptism was part of a Sunday morning service, you could have loads of people because we could make use of our space. And I know St Paul's Cathedral had a crazy situation where they could have literally hundreds on a Sunday morning, funeral the next day, 15. And that was just the way the rules worked, and so that was very difficult for people. And then when we moved up to 30 people at a funeral, you could do refreshments for half of them, but only 15 could have the refreshments. So they had to say, you're nominated to have refreshments and you're not. It was all a bit mad, really. We could have, according to our risk assessment, the number we want, and we had a few big weddings and big funerals in the context of social distancing, where we were beginning to get towards the limit. And suddenly people seemed to be throwing all the rules out the window. And I've been saying, well, people know what the rules are. They will come and behave and deal with it. And suddenly they weren't. And I'd have to stand up at the beginning of each wedding and funeral and say, these are the rules, and you know the rules, and you know if you're exempt or not. So, which seemed a shame to have to do that, really. And we had a couple where people just come in before we even sort of said hello, welcome. We're already hugging and embracing each other all over the place. I think it's just not okay. I need to start this now so we can settle people down back in their isolated bubbles and isolated seating.
I think the positives of it all is, I mean, one that we do have a social media effect in all the churches across the land that, you know, I mean, suddenly we discovered the digital age where we've been in the past. So it's good that people are now tuning in. I've got friends who had invited to church for many years, actually decades, who never came, but now who tune in regularly to hear me speak on a Sunday morning. So that's very positive. And it's just nice. You know, I mean, church is coming back, and it shows you the things that we missed. I mean, not being able to sing for a period of time, and now being able to worship again is just made it far more special. How about yourself?
Yeah, so quite a lot of positives, really. So on one hand, quite a lot of small, low-level positives. So the way we had used our time in lockdown, and really I'm trying to encourage people to see it as a bit of a retreat and spend some quality spiritual time with God. And that has produced some quite good fruit for people individually. And we now have a new prayer group started and a real new thirst for people meeting together to think about and engage with God with that. So that's been really good. And try to make positive use of that time. It's also been a good period for me to sit down and reflect, and some of my colleagues to sit down and reflect about the way things have been, the way things should be, and to really think about what the church is for and what we're here to be doing, and renewed from that so to the importance that the church should have something to offer to people of every generation and every stage of faith. And actually from that, I think one of our great positives is we work together a lot more closely. We did between Minchinhampton Baptist Church and the Parish Church, including things like our Big Top worship.
Just 2 days after the Big Top service, members of the travelling circus were struck down with COVID and they had to pack up and leave. The circus stayed closed for several weeks. On the town's allotments, however, life continued more or less as ever.
I live in Minchinhampton and I work in Stroud.
What do you work at?
I work at the Stroud District Furniture Bank.
And did the lockdown affect the bank?
It did affect the bank. Our referrals went up, but our donations went down to start with, till we could find a rhythm and a way for people to donate furniture in a safe manner. The demand for furniture went up.
Why?
Because people found themselves in more financial difficulty.
And what about the donations? Did they go up or down?
The donations went down to start with, and then once we could find a rhythm and a safe way for people to donate furniture again, the donations went up.
Why did they go up?
Because people had more to give. The tips were closed, so people were more selective as to what they could donate and not donate. I've got 3 children, 1 at Deer Park and 2 in Minch.
How did lockdown affect them and the schooling?
Well, it was homeschooling, and it affected them socially more than anything else because they missed the connection with other children. My wife works. She was also affected because she was also put on furlough because she works in the retail sector, and so the shop could no longer be open.
So did she do homeschooling as best she could?
We both did homeschooling the best we could.
Do you think your kids are now back to normal?
It feels like my kids are back to normal, but I'm sure there's always some kind of underlying fear of, will this happen again?
And they missed a chunk, didn't they, of schooling? They're going to catch up?
Whether they catch up or not is neither here nor there. but it has allowed them to learn more worldly things, like, you know, more about life itself. We got on the allotment a lot more. It allowed us a space to be together and also out in the open.
And what of life in the recently opened Crown Inn, which had opened in November 2019, closed down 4 months later, only to limp on through the summer of 2020 under new and unprecedented restrictions? You had a COVID case in the kitchens at one stage.
We did. We had one. It's a small kitchen. Once you have one case, the chances are it's more than one case, and it was. So we reacted extremely quickly. We had to shut the kitchen down for 10 days. By shutting the kitchen down, that means you're closing the restaurant, so all of your restaurant staff are also having to isolate. Yeah. So we did close for 2 weeks, which was financially very damaging when you have salaried staff. Yeah. But we kept the pub open for drinks only, which means that we can sell beer without having to throw it away and for it to spoil. Yeah. We're not making a profit, we're barely washing its face, just to keep the lights on and to sell beer, and to keep the pub open for the community. When we came out of our first lockdown, we're already very strong on compliance, but there was a whole new set of rules in order to operate safely as for our team and for the customers. Yeah. We're all wearing masks, everybody's having to sanitize, there are one-way systems put in place.
Track and tracing.
With the track and tracing, every single person who came into the building, we had to take their details and make sure we know exactly where they sit, how long they're in, so anybody could be contacted any time. Yeah. This is incredibly labour intensive. So we're into a period where you have every order for drink or food needs to be served at a table. So the actual service, the amount of work and effort from staff to do this well is quite colossal, but you're taking a lot less money because you've pulled a load of tables out to create more space. Yeah. You can't have people waiting at the bar. Yeah. So the workload has doubled, and the amount of money you're taking has halved. Yeah. And the stress level on the staff to do it well. But some customers aren't that patient. They expect things now, and you're having to run backwards and forwards for every single pint of beer. I think the quality of service and the attention, the peripheral vision of some of the team now has improved because they're used to having to spot, does that person need something, rather than just waiting for them to come to the bar. Yeah. They have to make sure they are attentive to every single person on the table. Yeah. Cut to later dates where people can come to the bar, we're still noticing if somebody needs something on the table. So I think the attention level, the quality of service has improved.
Meanwhile, a few doors down the high street, how was life at the Cotswold Club?
It was a very difficult time, the lockdown, very difficult, and it came at a very, very unfortunate time for us. Because obviously the club, we were just on the cusp of finishing our refurbishment, beautiful surroundings, and then bang, shut. Some luck involved. We were able to get the money back for the beer that we had in stock. Didn't get the money back, it was replaced with stock when we reopened. So the loss in that respect was minimised, but obviously we had staff who had to be furloughed, and eventually when we did get to almost reopening again, it was quite obvious that we were no longer going to be able to afford our manager. So unfortunately she left, but fortunately got another job within a day or two, so that's good news. But it was sad for us because we're now back to operating again as a club without a manager as such, run by the committee, which is quite difficult. We have no garden or open space, which of course, as people will be aware, those pubs that had gardens were able to open and provide an outdoor service when of course we were unable to do so. We're not even allowed to have anybody outside the front of the club drinking, so I'm afraid that meant a delay in how soon we could start serving people. And of course the other problem that we had, I mean, we are a club, we're not a multi-million pound operation, and we operate on a very low profit margin because it's for the benefit of the members, and having to do table service with the extra people that you needed to employ to do that efficiently meant we had to be quite creative in how we managed to achieve that. And the members were very understanding, but needless to say, the numbers were down considerably even when we reopened between the first and the second lockdown, and subsequently now. We went over and above the requirements. So for example, you had to take your temperature, which was not a standard procedure. Then you had to wear a mask, obviously, when you were moving about within the club. You couldn't go to, if you saw a friend sitting up there, you couldn't go and talk to them. You had to stay in your table. We had a one-way system coming in the front door, going round and out, one in and one out in both sets of toilets. So we were very much on it and sanitising the tables in between and so on. So, I mean, as far as I know, nobody was pinged from here. We, of course, had one big advantage in the sense that we know a member by their number. Well, we can find out who they are, so we only needed to take their number. And then, so from a data protection point of view, we didn't have to worry about having somebody's name and address or anything. So that was quite good. Way before the pandemic, many of the pubs that had skittle alleys have shut them and turned them into restaurants or whatever. So we actually had 6 Skittles teams who used this as their home base, which meant there was Skittles Monday to Friday nights, which of course is a very useful use of the club, and it means that we got lots of people in during the week. That of course stopped. The leagues are still not sure how they're going to manage it when they reopen, and of course a lot of the skittlers are of a certain age who perhaps are a little more reticent, but we're hoping to get it going. The snooker, because of course we got 2 fabulous full-size snooker tables. They've recently been recovered with championship cloth. They are in use because obviously there's space, and we can use those. So yeah, we are very hopeful, but it's about persuading people to come.
I think we were the fortunate ones in this circumstance.
In what ways were you fortunate?
Still working, not furloughing staff. Yeah, very fortunate that way. Shop sales, I would say, were up, but catering sales obviously non-existent because pubs and restaurants closing.
But are the shop sales up because people are shopping locally? Do you think people are not going into Stroud?
I would like to think so, yes. People shopping locally, yes. Yeah.
So you didn't travel to Stroud?
No travelling, I would say. You know, just keeping it all nice and local, which is benefiting us, of course. Impulse buying, impulse purchases, I would say non-existent, obviously, because people couldn't come in the shop and look around. But most of our customers know what we sell, so hopefully they were buying that, you know, of what we knew, of what they knew. And of course we had a delivery system as well, so we were delivering to customers which were isolating.
Tell us more about that. What you were ordering
by phone, leaving an answer, and then obviously we deliver the next day. So that's created a whole new delivery system. So whether that continues after lockdown, I don't know. 2020 Christmas was different. Manic is the word, because obviously we were serving customers from 2 doors, and of course all the orders going out from there. People wasn't allowed in the shop. So yeah, it was very different, but good for us because business was good again. A lot more new faces. Yeah, so overall, it was a good Christmas. And of course, with our business, you see, we can't use online, really, because it's not a business for that. You know, big things like Amazon and stuff like that, they've benefited, obviously.
Yes.
So yeah, I think we've been very lucky with the customers we got. They're very patient.
Yeah.
You know, when there was really wet days, they were queuing in it. You know, so yeah, there's been a lot of patience. The queuing took place on its own accord. People turned up. There was no timed system or anything like that. On the plus side, I would like to, on behalf of all of us, say a big thank you to all the customers we've had and have kept shopping with us.
Lockdown 1 was a completely different way of working. You know, forced everyone to put their details into our spreadsheet. Kate kindly sat there and did all that, administered that task, and sold to them out of that window just over there. And yeah, I mean, the queues were huge, 20 people long with 2 metres between each, so it was quite a spectacle.
One thing you couldn't do in lockdown 1, and you can do now, is you couldn't do loose milk.
Yeah, loose milk was actually something we've been doing for the whole time we've owned the shop, so over 12 years now. We're a bit of a pioneer with it, and as most people know, it's always been a little bit disorganised, ladle into a bottle, running out every half hour. We've really missed it, so I've invested a relative amount of money into a proper milk dispensing machine, which will be bottle in, press the button, out we go.
That must bring you a lot of customers, the loose milk.
Yeah, so the loose milk is, as I said, one of our USPs. A lot of customers started with us purely because of that. I've seen children grow from knee height to like late teens in the time that they've been coming in with their glass bottles. Being completely honest, I would never have had the guts to have made changes this drastic, and I'm pretty sure 99% of businesses that have changed would say the same. So no, I mean, we were also very lucky that we were making these changes in real time, and customers were really eager to embrace them. They were making suggestions and just reacting positively as soon as we made them. So it was a great springboard almost to reinvent the business. I believe the 2020 pandemic was beneficial to the business, definitely. We're considerably more organised now. The team is amazing. It's brought all of us closer together, not only as team members, but Kate's like my best friend now. She also runs all the difficult aspects of the business for me. Yeah, you had to adapt, but if you did, you came out of it on top. It was great.
As we've seen, everyone was affected by the scourge of COVID, but people reacted to it and its restrictions in a rich variety of ways. Throughout history, Minchinhampton has no doubt had its share of plagues, wars and pestilences. But we've got sparse record of how people here coped day to day with, for instance, the Black Death in the 1300s, or the Elizabethan plagues, the English Civil War, or even the Victorian outbreaks of diseases like typhus. But now, with the benefit of video and film, we have at least got a snapshot of how our small Cotswold town coped with the COVID pandemic of 2020.